Welcome back to Talent Thrives Here, where we talk to leaders in multiple industries about their passions and their direction. Welcome today, our guest, Steve Yacovelli. Steve, you've done a wide range of things, starting in software development, writing your own books, moving into a master's and a doctorate, and becoming a what I like to think of as the soft skills whisperer, doing organizational design and behavior and training and coaching. You've got degrees and papers from Harvard and other schools. You've been a leadership consultant on Disney Cruises and many other companies. You're also trademarked as the gay leadership dude, providing real life workplace advice for the LGBTQ plus people. You're living and working in Florida right now, and I'm curious if life has gotten very interesting in the last few years. Has it changed dramatically given the politics and everything going on down there?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for having me, Lance. I'm really excited to have our little chat here. And to answer your first question, yes, it is. It definitely, as someone who does diversity, equity, and inclusion work, both for the queer community as well as any other out there. It's
Right.
been an interesting time here in Florida, but I live in Orlando, and much like what we were talking about before we started hitting record, this community is insanely inclusive. So when all this weird stuff goes on from a state level, I know my local leaders are just like, "Nah, we got you. We'll sort this out." So yeah.
Yeah. I remember being in Florida last year. We went down for a conference, a kids screen animation conference, and then we spent a few days in South Beach. And community there is, I think, a microcosm or a bubble. Like it's not the exact same
Yeah.
community you find everywhere else. And it was interesting because there was um, a drag show, a place, a bar going through. I think their 40th or 50th anniversary or something like,
Yeah.
a big anniversary. And so there were drag queens flying in from all over the place, and it was a monumental event. And I think at that point the laws had shifted last year, and there
Yeah.
was concerns, and the mayor showed up and gave a speech at this drag show about we're
That's
gonna.
awesome.
It was a very interesting time and place to be there to see all these things going on. It's not
Yeah.
the education system's going through all sorts of challenges,
Yeah.
and but
It's definitely giving a lot of attention to the concepts of diversity, equity, inclusion, regardless of the different others,
yeah,
especially of course the LGBTQ plus community. And I have been pulled in to do some keynotes and things with folks and educational things. And but oddly enough, I have lost some business because of some of the
sure,
state funded pieces. They're like, oh, we can't spend any more money for diversity, equity, inclusion things. I'm like, well, then let's just do generic leadership.
yeah,
Wink. So
yeah,
we're,
yeah,
we're
yeah.
trying to sort that out. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I hear you. Yeah, and it's interesting because like when I'm recruiting, sometimes I've had uh I remember specifically a few years back an HR the vice president of HR on the job hunt saying, "Hey, just so I'm being completely transparent with you, you need to know that I'd be better off in a very a company where the leaders are swaying this way on the spectrum. I won't say which way, but one way
Yeah.
very deliberately. And she just said that I fit better in that culture, and I fit better with those folks. So if
Yeah.
you're going to find me a job, make sure it's in an area where everyone is leaning to where it's the same politics that I have. And I thought, well, that's tricky for an HR person. Aren't you supposed to be kind of neutral, and facilitate all folks and so on? But she said, yeah, no, I used to be like that. No, I'm not. She was,
Yeah.
you know,
And that's actually a really great topic. What I do in our leadership programming, I don't talk politics, although as someone who does diversity, equity, and inclusion work as well as inclusive leadership, I have my kind of perspective on things, but I always frame it up to say, it's all about values. And so instead of saying, oh, I don't want someone who leans this way or that way, it's like I want someone who aligns with my workplace values. And when you look at the Fortune 1000, the vast majority of them have something in there around we respect people of various backgrounds and all that good
sure.
stuff. So if that's what's on the wall, then yeah, I can get behind that. And then if there's a violation once I'm inside the door, then that's a conversation you can have. This is not the value we're supposed to all adhere to, right? And
Right.
you had that conversation.
Yeah, and I would imagine that's a challenge in a lot of organizations where one level of management, or maybe two or three, are drinking the Kool-Aid, so to speak. They're on board. They're going in the right direction. But then another level fractures it somewhere,
Mhm.
right? Where either an individual or two or three
Yeah.
individuals have given it lip service, but they're not actually following through. And therefore, it creates a dynamic of people looking up or down in the organization, or maybe laterally saying they're not really on board.
No.
And so, you tell me, you've probably seen it. Does it create mayhem in the fact that people then start cutting out because, I've seen people misbehave sometimes because somebody else is
Mm.
getting away with something and they go, well, if they're not following it, we're not following it, right? And
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and so that's where I always coach my folks to say, always go back to those workplace values, and if they are being violated, then that's a violation against the company, not necessarily if they're perpetrating some sort of micro inequity or something to that effect. I love though how even though it's a lot of times it's up in the upper C-suite or so, and then maybe it doesn't trickle all the way down, but there's a really awesome study that was just released a few weeks ago where they surveyed business leaders about the concepts of diversity, equity, inclusion, and that's not unheard of. But what I love is that they striated the data. So there's like nerdy words if you're listening to that. Basically, they cut the data by political leaning. And what they found was, 82% of business leaders consider diversity initiatives as essential to the business strategy. 82%. And then when you cut that data by political leaning, it didn't change.
oh
There's
well,
it, and that's what I thought was so cool. Even the most
yeah,
conservative folks basically said, yeah, I may not be personally be this, but I know that's how I get innovation. I
yeah,
recruit top talent and all that good
right,
stuff. And so the business case is there. And I love that that data is just yet more reinforcing DE&I efforts.
yeah. It's amazing because I mean, I work a lot in the entertainment field, and we saw several years ago positions start to open up for a director or a vice president of DEI, and those were new roles.
Mhm.
So, and I've worked with some folks in that area, and again, they're sometimes battling really tricky water because the company still is old guard, or it has a
Mhm.
homogenous kind of culture, and let's say 20% are pushing for the new initiatives, and some of the folks are quite quiet, or they're reserved because they're waiting for it to be official, or
Yeah.
they're waiting for guidance from above, so to speak, for this to actually be a thing. And um and then if the economy went down a bit, it seemed like some of those folks got their jobs cut. Like
Mhm.
they were no longer funding DEI because we got to go back to
Oh,
core
yeah.
values, or we got to go
Right.
back to core business, whatever fundamentally makes us,
Yep.
what's our bottom line look like? And so have you seen that as well? I mean, I saw it in a few spots when I thought, oh, what a bummer. Like there was these good kind of progressive and kind of
Yep.
interesting conversations happening and changes. And then it was like, oh, there's an economy shift. So let's dump that for the
Yeah.
time being. Let's shelve it.
Yeah, and you are seeing that, and that is a massive flag of performative allyship, meaning I'm doing it because 2020, George Floyd, and all these initiatives happen. Yeah, we need to hire a DEI professional.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is great. Economy goes weird, and like, see ya. And that's just so telling that you really didn't mean it. And
Right.
and so when there's institutions here in Florida and many places where they by law now have to shelve that particular role, but then
Mm.
other companies that are independent are just like, oh yeah, economy, yeah, we need to get rid of this person. It's like then you really didn't care in the first place. And I
Right.
think then that when the pendulum swings back or the economy goes there, people are always watching and people will take note of that. Like, hey,
Yeah.
did you cut your D&I? You really don't mean it. You're just trying to get my money and look inclusive. And that's
Mm.
what I think is so fascinating too. Is there was another study done by Ernst and Young not too long ago, and by 2030, 30% of the workforce will be Gen Z. So
Well,
that's 6 years from now.
yeah.
30% of the workforce is from that younger generation.
Yeah.
And if you look at them, their expectation for diversity, equity, inclusion efforts in the workplace is like 96%, where they,
Mm.
they expect it. So a
Yeah.
third of the workplace wants that. It has to come back. It's not going away.
Yeah. Yeah. It is fascinating. Several people that have got teenagers or early 20s, and they look at life very differently than
Oh
the
yeah.
people that are, even a decade older than them. It's a very different crowd of folks coming up. So, yeah. And as you said, their expectations are dramatically different. What they're looking
Yeah.
for is just dramatically different.
And like case in point, in this EY study, about and it's close to 30% of Gen Z women identify as queer. So
Wow.
that's it, like exponentially higher than, I'm Gen
Yeah.
Xer. And so to your point,
Yeah.
it's a different world, and it's going to be a different workplace. And
Yeah.
those organizations that don't get behind it or don't embrace it, or at least try to get ahead of it, are going to severely be lacking the good talent that's out there.
Yeah, yeah. I got a question for you. I occasionally get in our recruiting and in consulting, we come across folks that are like, "Hey, I'm championing, DEI at my company," or I've been asked to sit on a committee about DEI,
Mhm.
and this happened multiple times in the last few years where somebody says, "Here's the deal. I'm the only person of color on this committee," and we're having really strange conversations because I'm not running the committee, but they don't really understand the mandate. Like they've been elected or volunteered or something to be on this committee. And she said,
Voluntold.
yeah. And she said, I can't believe the things. I remember one or two people, folks have sort of been shocked. Like,
Yeah.
I don't think this culture is going to get there because everyone that's on the committee actually doesn't look like they're in a minority.
Mhm.
So, how do I, as a young person on this team, somehow try to educate them, and I'm curious if I've had to deal with the question several times. I'm
Mhm.
curious if you get that and how you would coach that person
Mm.
on here's the roadmap or
Yeah.
possible roadmaps forward.
Yeah, and it's a great question. And so oftentimes what one of the things that my business Top Dog Learning Group does is we go into companies and do inclusive leadership training.
Mm,
And so there's oftentimes I'm in a room and I mean I'm the gay leadership dude, so you already know some of my diversity and how I identify.
yeah,
But there might be a lot of white middle-aged dudes who are sitting in my
sure,
room. They're like, well, why am I'm not diverse? And we actually start all of our conversation with defining what is diversity, because
yeah,
most folks go to a certain place and it's a yes and. So there's a model, and if you're watching you can see the model. If you're not, I'll describe it for you. But it's called the 5 layers of diversity by these two amazing pioneers in the DE&I space, Garden Schwartz and Rowe, Lee Garden Schwartz and Anita Rowe. And they basically said all humans are made up of all these different layers, these 5 layers, but at the core what makes everyone unique is your personality. There will never be another Lance, there'll never be another Steve, because we have our unique personalities. But then the next layer out is what they call your internal dimensions. And these are things that overall don't change over your lifetime. They're things like age, your gender identification, your race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, physical ability. Of course, that can change with as you get older. But these are the things that everybody goes to. They're like, diversity, your race, gender, sexual orientation. They jump there, and it's a yes and then you go to the next layer, which is called the external dimensions, and these are things that change sometimes daily. Things like
mm,
your income, your personal habits, religion, your physical appearance, your parental status. These are things that fluctuate, but they all contribute to how you look at the world and how you make decisions and interact. Then there's the organizational dimensions, which are kind of the context of your workplace or your organization, whatever. I'm in finance. I'm in sales. I was part of that legacy company that did the merger and acquisition stuff. But they again all contribute to your uniqueness. And then they get to the final layer, which is called country of operation. And this one they added fairly recently, where it's wherever you're sitting impacts how you look at the world. So,
mm,
I'm here in the US. So, political system, values, business etiquette, the language, social structure, they all kind of impact how you look at the world. And so, to answer your question, what we do is make sure that everybody understands they're unique, they're diverse. It can be down to handedness. I'm left-handed, I'm right-handed. That contributes to how you interact with the world. And
yeah,
so when people start thinking that way, that it's not just about those internal dimensions, then they start opening themselves up like, oh yeah, as a parent, I do look at the world differently than someone maybe who isn't a parent or is
mhm,
not a human parent, maybe a canine parent or something. So I think
right,
that's kind of the best way to do it.
yeah.
And it just helps people understand that every single one of us is unique. We just look at the world a little bit differently depending on the makeup of those 5 layers.
Excellent. I love it. Great. Have you got more slides about the company? I'd love to, if you have more to share.
About my company?
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely,
sure.
Steve.
Yeah. So I for Top Dog Learning Group, I like to say that our doghouse sits in the center of three different but insanely complementary areas. We do leadership and organizational development. We focus on diversity, inclusion, and creating that sense of belonging in the workplace. And we look at change management and being resilient in times of change. And if we're doing it right, we're doing all three of those areas through a bunch of different stuff. We do webinars, keynotes, off-the-shelf training programs, both virtual and in person, just straight up consulting. And we primarily work with large companies, large Fortune 1000s, large non-for-profits, both here in the US, Canada, as well as beyond. And it's been a really cool, I mean, I've had this business for 16 years as my full-time gig, but I've been doing this kind of work on my whole career, which is almost 30 years now, which is weird to think.
Right, right. Okay, it sneaks up here and quickly, doesn't
Right.
it? Yeah, my brother's turning 60 this year. We're like, how did that happen? How did you get there? Like,
Yeah.
what the heck? We were running around on our bicycles just yesterday, skinning our knees. So
my,
I
my,
haven't.
my, yeah, go ahead. Uh,
No, I was gonna say I have a question about gender with DEI. Do you find, and maybe it's polarizing, but is there by gender does one gender or another out there sort of you know look at DEI more openly than the other or others?
I don't see a trend, but I also try not to look for trends based upon one demographic type of situation. But
Yeah,
I do see people who are, as we kind of talked about a few moments ago, who are a different generation, maybe a younger generation or
right,
newer into the workplace, are quite more open to the concepts of
right,
diversity, equity, inclusion. So I don't know if it's by a gender line, but I do think it
sure,
is about age line and
generationally, yeah,
experience what you grow up with, and that just kind of makes sense.
yeah. And I also have a question about any big success stories for your company in the last 2 or 3 years. Have you been involved with a client where you're like, this is a major win for the following reasons, and we're so excited? And do you want to tell one of those if you got one?
I love that question. Thank you. So, I am, as you said, I am an author, and I've had the pleasure of my fifth book actually launched just a few weeks ago called Your Queer Career. But what I've done is created a bunch of assets and training. And I never thought I'd be like the gay leadership dude, to be very honest with you. I
Right.
didn't seek that out. But when I was writing my last book, which was called Pride Leadership Strategies for the LGBTQ plus leader to be the king or queen of their jungle, I was working with my publisher, who is Jen Grace. She happens to be right here. Amazing publisher boutique with Publisher Purpose Press. And we were kind of going through the book writing process as well as the marketing of it. She's like, "Well, what's your personal brand?" I'm like, "What?" She's like, "What's your brand?" I said, "Well, it's Top Dog Learning Group." She's like, "No, no, no. That's your business.
Right.
What's your personal brand?" And so that's kind of how the Gay Leadership Dude came about. But as I wrote Pride Leadership, and then it created a training class that went around it, and it created this ecosystem. And so the story, I like to say how my little book babies kind of work together. And if you're watching, you can see, yes, they're designed to look similar. That's not by accident. But
Right.
I just had a leader who I was coaching right before this recording, and they're in my Lions program, my queer leadership program, and they said how they feel seen and
Mm,
safe. But
mm,
we're talking leadership, like I say, through the rainbow lens. And
right.
I hear that so often, that people are like, yeah, I do approach leadership just a little bit differently given my queer experience. And I say,
Hmm.
yes. And I feel safe being able to talk about that here. I'm like, yes. So it's been
Right.
really cool. And so I guess it's not one big win, but since the Lions program launched in 2020, right after Pride Leadership launched in 2019, I've had hundreds of those kinds of little stories, and that's what
Right.
I think is the big win. It's those tiny little indentations that we give in people's lives.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an interesting, I find it very interesting topic because I remember being at a few places where they were very inclusive and very open and other places where things weren't discussed. And
Yeah.
so, very different vibe. And I remember being at a place where one of the executives was very out, very proud, very loud about it. And it was a whole different vibe in there because like, wow, this is dynamic. And, she was very boldly discussing a lot of things that in other places weren't sort of on the table.
Yeah.
And I do remember a few folks in that company saying, I feel better here. I feel like I can be myself here because she's doing that. She's setting the pace. And I don't have to be reluctant to offer things or challenge
Mm,
things. You know what I mean? It was very refreshing, I
yeah.
found, to see that somebody was very open about her sexuality and very, very
Mm,
inclusive, and it invited a whole different level of, I think, transparency or
yeah.
authenticity. and
Well,
and so it was valuable.
I love that you just said that, Lance, because so in Pride Leadership, Pride Leadership is like it's about theory, but like I said, it's through the rainbow lens. But what I did was I took what I see as the top 6 leadership competencies that anyone, regardless of who you are, should really be focusing on. It's authenticity, courage, empathy, communication, relationships, and culture. And then like I said, I put that through the rainbow lens. And so we talk about authenticity, for example. And I just love the story you're just sharing because it ties in so well. You know, people like Brene Brown have been saying for years, like, being authentic is better leadership. People will trust you. People can tell when you're not being authentic. So now if I'm an out gay man in the workplace, or I'm a trans person being my authentic self, not only does that feel better, but I do better work. I'm have better connections with those people around me. And so
Right.
you do see that, you know, you have some organizations like, oh, keep your personal life out of here. Shenanigans. We're humans. We can't do that. So,
Right.
you know, that's why I love these 6 competencies. And so that's kind of what you see in Pride Leadership, kind of how you develop these. And then in your career is where I answer actually real questions and I organize them by the same competencies. So here's a handful of questions I got on how do I be my authentic self at work, or how do I shape my workplace culture to be more inclusive? And it's just been this weird, cool ecosystem that kind of evolved since 2020. And it's just been really fun because, you know, people are like, well, can you de-gay your book? I'm like, no, but the same stuff holds true. And I've had a lot of straight people both read and go through our training program. They're like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, this totally fits with me, except that you have really bad dad jokes in your book. I'm like, absolutely. It makes learning
Yeah.
more fun. So
Right. Right. That's funny. Can you decay your book? Yeah. Well, take the colors down a notch or something. Just make it a little bit more
right.
pastel or
Be like
something.
that.
That's
It'd be
funny.
like this. No, it'd be like that.
Nice. Nice. You're ready for that. I see that. That's
Yeah.
good. All right. Excellent. Well, Steve, I'm conscious of the time. Are there any other things you want to bring to the table for anyone that's listening or watching the show, and you know, to get out there and let people know more about you and your company?
Yeah, the easiest thing to do is to go to topdoglearning.biz, B-I-Z, where you can meet me and my awesome team of top doggers, my consultants, see all the books and training classes we offer. And then also in the show notes, we'll put a link to a free training class. It's how to beat silent collusion. It's short, but you find yourself in that situation where someone says a really bad remark and you don't
Mm,
say a word. That's called
mm,
silent collusion. You're silently supporting that,
right.
quite frankly, stupid remark. And so we created a little 6-point strategy on how in that live moment you can kind of step up and be seen and defend the rights of others
Right.
using one of these 6 strategies. And we call it MOP, Sam. It's really cheeky and silly, but it
Cool.
works.
No, it's excellent. I was an HR director where occasionally a meeting would happen and a senior leader would say something, and I kind of went, I'm gonna make a note of that. And
Yeah.
then after the meeting, like several people would email me, you know, that needs to be addressed. I'm like, I'm on it, I'm on it, you know. And then it was a coaching call. It was just, like,
Yeah.
hey, did you realize in your vernacular you said the following 2 words over the last half hour? No, I didn't realize I said that. Yeah, if we were had
Yeah.
that on tape, I'd play it back. Oh, really? And do you understand how that might have gotten read by different people in the room? No, I never gave that any thought. Okay, well, let's do some thinking.
Let's have
You know,
some thinking.
let's
Exactly.
unpack how this could have been received by somebody. And they're like, was it you? I'm like, no, it wasn't me. I was just rolling with it, but I was
Yeah.
hoping, you know,
We
but
have
you know,
so
it's
many.
that sort of thing. People
Yeah.
stumble sometimes, right?
Yeah,
And
and that's
they,
fine. And it's
yeah,
so, and that's like our inclusive leadership programming. That's exactly what it talks about is, you know,
yeah,
we're all going to mess up, but how can you
sure.
uh, provide that feedback to correct the person and then hopefully they don't do it again?
Right. Yeah. Fix it. Apologize if need be and move forward. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. Well, Steve, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure having you on the show. Hopefully we can connect at some point down the road again and maybe drill in on 1 or 2 specific topics
Love
and
it.
see how life has changed. But thank you again. I really appreciate having you on the show.
Thank you, Lance. And thank you for creating the space. It's awesome.
Very welcome. Bye, friend.